Welcome to the fifth episode of the Nesting Eagles podcast. We are coordinators for the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, Bald Eagle Nest Watch, and citizen scientists. I am Drew. I'm here with my co-host Beth. Beth, how are you?
I'm doing all right, waiting for the big storm tonight.
Yeah, and that kind of transitions to what we're going to talk about. I think this is going to be our main focus for this one, as it's all over the news. But we're going to talk about how weather affects nesting bald eagles, because there is a lot to get into. Let's first start. Beth, you're kind of more of the expert of this, but we're going to talk about the Friends of Big Bear Valley nest and what's going on there currently. So I'll let you. This is a picture, a screen grab from that Nest Cam, but I'll let Beth kind of tell the more of the story as she's more versed in what's going on there.
Well, Jackie and Shadow, this is their nest, and I have been periodically tuning into this nest over the years, and I know the last 2 years they were not successful. Their eggs did not hatch last year, and I forget what the reason was the year before that. So they've been having a not so great track record, but this year they laid 3 eggs. And I think the first pip was around March 2nd, where the egg tooth was being used to hatch the first chick. And all 3 chicks ended up hatching. The parents, Jackie and Shadow, have been very diligent, making sure all 3 eaglets get fed. There's a little bit of head bonking going on, but nothing terrible. One day this past week, Jackie did have an eaglet sort of stuck in her feathers, and before she flew off the nest, the eaglet did land back on the rim of the nest and managed to roll back down into the nest bowl on its own. And now the fear is that might have something like that might have happened again, because this morning, after this huge storm that is heading our way in Wisconsin, after it hit the nest there in California as it came ashore, it dumped 2 feet of snow. And when Jackie broke through the snow this morning to stand up, there was only 2 visible eaglets in the nest bowl. You didn't have a clear view of the whole bowl, but once she moved, it was clear that there were only 2 eaglets. And so there's no real idea of where that third eaglet could be. So if we're looking at this picture right now, the nest bowl would be where you see the exposed sticks. And that eaglet could be somewhere in that snowpack that's around it, like when she went to go settle back down onto the nest, for some reason one of the eaglets wasn't underneath her. um, and they need to be underneath her, because with so much cold blowing snow and extremely high winds, that's just going to dry out a little eaglet, and it's going to freeze to death pretty quickly. The only really kind thing we can say is that it would have been over very quickly for that little eaglet. Um, but then, as you and I both know, Drew, this is not a shocking thing to happen. This is the life of a raptor. Um, Raising 3 eaglets to fledge is certainly becoming more common, as you always tell me.
Yeah,
When food is abundant, this is a great sign,
yeah.
that you can raise 3 eaglets to fledge. And it by looking at all of the salmon there lining up in the snow, there's plenty of food resources there. There's no reason why they couldn't raise 3 eaglets, but to no fault of Jackie or Shadow, weather came into play.
Yeah, I think that's a big, especially these guys, these are, we kind of call them puffballs when they're this young. And, they're so susceptible. And just from our data and our experience with the bald eagle nest watch, this time of year, once, that couple weeks after hatch is real crucial time. And especially weather related failures at nests and losing eaglets, like with this case at Big Bear. It's that time frame that can easily knock them out. They're just so small. I think I mentioned this before at some of the other podcasts, but when they first hatch, they're about 2 ounces, so they're real small and they grow pretty quickly. But they're very susceptible to anything that happens in the nest, and whether in this instance was probably the cause of the demise of one of the eaglets, which is unfortunate. But in a lot of cases, that's one of the reasons they have multiple eaglets. They lay more than one eggs. Just so they have, they want to have a productive nest. For example, if they only had one egg that was laid and that one egg got lost or the eaglet died, they had nothing and the nest fails. But when they do multiples, as you mentioned, Beth, when food is good and abundant, and it looks like it is at this nest, they are able to rear, more than one eaglet to fledge, hopefully. So, yeah, that's it's a little bit rough, and I understand there's a lot of people that watch nest cams, and it's hard to think of it in kind of a human light and a human
Right.
emotion, but they're not phased by that. They have to keep going, and those adults are going to keep going and try to make sure the two survivors are going to make it and fledge. That's their ultimate goal, is to be productive and have those fledglings, out into the world. So that's extreme. That's their main focus. It's not. They're not going to mourn. They're not going to do anything like that, like we do. They just don't have that capability. They're wild animals, and they just don't have that bandwidth, I guess, that
Well,
we
it's
do as
also, I
humans.
think, too, we don't have to go out and kill our food,
Yeah.
if we're carnivores, um, or pescatarians. We aren't going out and getting our food daily and killing it. In a raptor world, this is just a fact that every day something is going to die. It's either going to give its life to food, or you lose an eaglet, as in the case of these guys this morning, because nature is nature. It's kind of brutal, and it's certainly survival of the fittest. um and there were concerns about the bonking, the head knocks that some of these birds would take out on their siblings. And I don't think this is going to be a case of sibling side. Sibling didn't shove its eaglet sibling out of the nest bowl. It's just going to be, the odd circumstances that happen. If these eaglets are all being fed and getting their turn at being fed, then there's those. We know that sibling side is not a very common
Yeah.
thing, at least from what we've been able to observe in our combined 23 years or so of nest watching. Um, so it just is, it's heartbreaking to a lot of people watching it. But it is a fact of life that
Yeah.
in a raptor's life, something is going to die every day
Yeah.
for food.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see that a lot of nests. I've seen it a number of times. You see three, and then by the end of the season, you might have two or one. It's just the nature of it. It's a hard, pretty much 5 month process for eagles, from nesting, and a lot of things can happen, and weather definitely impacts them a lot. So, I think the answer to does how does weather affect nesting eagles? It's a lot is a
Hmm.
simple answer to it. There's a lot of things, and we've done over the years that we've done it. We can trace. Not every nest we can tell what happened and why it failed. But in a normal year, I'd say the vast majority of the reasons a nest fail is weather related.
Right.
And let's get into a little bit about what happens in Wisconsin for us. just or eagles in general. There's a couple stories I've monitored nests, in Colorado and New York, Wisconsin, and just some of the stories that stuck out with me is one of them was in Colorado. Um, we had to, I think if I remember correctly, it was pushing like 65-mile-an-hour winds, and I was out observing my nest, and I have a spotting scope with tripod is usually how I monitor the nest, and I couldn't even look through the tripod. The wind was blowing so much it was just shaking, and you couldn't see anything. And unfortunately, the adults were fighting it. They could not get back to their nest. And the eaglets, if I remember correctly, they had a couple that were about probably maybe a little bit older than these guys, on the like 3 to 4 week range around there. And they just could not get back to their nest, and they were fighting it, trying, just flying over the nest and trying to land and then circling back, and then a gust of wind would blow them away. And unfortunately, I went back the next day because I was so concerned, and nothing. The nest had failed. So stuff like that. Wind is definitely a big factor, and Beth and a large part of Wisconsin's going to get hit tonight with
Yeah.
some wind and storms and stuff. And it's you guys are bracing for that. So hopefully everybody gets through okay, and also the Eagles get through. Another one was when I was in New York. Um, we had a huge snowstorm. I think it's the biggest snowstorm I've ever seen in my lifetime. It was about over 3 feet of snow, and it was just crazy. Like, it took me multiple days to just get out of my driveway, to shovel it out, and it just, everything pretty much shut down. But finally, when I got out to my nests, they were fine. They were not bothered at all. As Beth and I have mentioned before, I think is snow is a good insulator, so it actually helps if they do have eggs, or if they have little eaglets they're still incubating. It's snow's not a problem for them. So that, these guys, it was just amazing to watch. Like, you have these enormous nests, and then they have a pile of snow up multiple feet, and they were just buried under there, and pretty much just kind of built kind of like a makeshift igloo over
Yeah.
themselves
And
for
it
this huge
helps
storm.
the bird on the nest too. It's a
Yeah.
blanket over mom or dad. It looks like it'd be horribly cold to us, but it's a blanket that helps cut down on the wind, because the wind itself is um, probably more of an energy loss to an adult
Yeah.
bald eagle and young eaglets in the nest.
Yeah, for sure. And then just the amount of snow, it can be a problem too. It can have nests come down and collapse.
Mhm.
That's just by the sheer weight of the nest itself, and then snow added it to it can be a concern. And the third one was actually interesting. It was, I believe it was 23 in Wisconsin. We had such a dry late spring, early summer, and what was happening is we just weren't getting much rain. And I've never seen this before, but a lot of the nests, you don't think about it, but the nests, because they're made of sticks, dead sticks, they were actually really drying out. So these sticks that they were building the nest with, were getting much lighter and much more brittle. And we had a number of nests, pretty much a gust of wind would come through and just destroy the nest. They would just kind of blow up, because they were just so dry. And then unfortunately, we had to rescue a few eaglets in that situation. And the other ones, if they didn't, they stayed up in the nest tree, were either, perched in a nearby branch, or they were kind of in these dilapidated nests that had that had been partially blown away. So it was
Crumpled
a
nest
crazy
bark.
year. Yeah. So just weather is such a huge factor of the success of eagles, and what they're what's going to happen. Can you think of any, Beth, that you've come across as far as
Yeah.
weather related?
Well, last year we had that really odd one of we had a nest that is in an oak tree, and in an oak grove, and it got hit by lightning, and it
Yeah.
killed the adult that was incubating which was brooding the chicks. They had hatched, and we could see that feeding was going on, but they were still so small we couldn't, you know, reasonably count beaks and know how many young were in the nest. Um, but it got hit by lightning, and then and a part of their world is that a couple of eagles were there a few days later, and they were feeding on the adult that was dead in the nest, incubating the two chicks. And that really isn't a surprise in the raptor world, because here they have a valuable resource, and so they were making the most of it. But I'm not sure if it was the mate that
Yeah.
was consuming the adult in the nest, but nonetheless, that was something that occurred in that instance. And then sort of coupled with the dry brittle nests, when you go to a nest site when it has fallen down, and they're just these massive nests up
Yeah.
in the air, and then you go to see whether the eaglets survive the fall or not. And what is really interesting to me, and it's such a surprise each time, is just how not obvious that nest is.
Yeah.
Because when it falls and those brittle sticks hit the ground, they just fracture into hundreds of pieces. So you see a lot of debris, but it isn't like these big sticks that were once up in the tree. It's like somebody came through and mulched everything, because it just pulverizes the nest, the impact of it hitting the ground.
Yeah, it's
Um,
weird because you go to those sites. I've had to unfortunately do that a few times
yeah.
when a nest has come down and you're looking for survivors. It's usually not. There's usually none. But you kind of people would think that you'd kind of see an actual like, oh, okay, there's the eagle nest, and it's just as you mentioned, Beth. It's just like debris everywhere, and it's just it's like it kind of it kind of like it just blew up because
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
like a tree
yeah,
exploded.
yeah,
The biggest fragment is like 6 inches.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
there might be a limb from the tree, large limb of support that came down. That would be your biggest portion, but it's amazing how it shatters, and
yeah.
how susceptible that would be to fire. It's a good thing they don't cook up there in their nests.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, some of the other things that, as you mentioned, lightning, we've seen that a couple of times. It's really unfortunate. There's actually been a couple of situations where they've survived. So I don't know if we didn't see the occurrence when the nest was actually or the nest tree was hit. But my guess is probably thunder awoken the adults and maybe scared them so they took flight and were not in the physical tree, or maybe they were kind of far enough away from the lightning strike that they didn't get the full strike. But we've seen that a couple times in Wisconsin where the tree was hit. It makes a lot of sense because if just the nature of what a nest tree is, a lot of times, especially in Wisconsin, where we have a lot of nests kind of out on their own or in a cluster of trees where it's the tallest one. It's the one that's going to get hit by lightning because it is the tallest tree and it's kind of out on its own. So um, it's I wouldn't call it common, but it does happen a fair amount where eagle nests are getting hit by lightning.
Well, so now what's a concern to me is this nest is still there,
Yeah,
and they are incubating right now, and we're getting this storm tonight.
yeah,
And last year, after it happened, I Googled what is the most susceptible tree to lightning strikes, and it is the oak tree.
yeah,
So unfortunately,
yeah,
if you believe Google, and that sounded reasonable, that
yeah,
this is not setting up to be a good night
yeah,
potentially for that nest again. But
yeah.
the
It's
nest
it's
getting blown down is certainly the most common thing. Either it gets blown out of the tree, or part of the tree comes down with it, or the whole tree goes. And as you know, Drew, along one of our highway systems here in Wisconsin, we have a tree that is leaning, and
Yeah.
it's leaning on the tree next to it, and they are incubating right now. So
Yeah.
that's one of the nests I'm concerned with for tomorrow morning.
Yep. So we'll, I definitely, our volunteers will be, trying to get out to their nest. Hopefully this, this storm isn't as bad as it's forecasted. But when our volunteers can get out there, hopefully, hopefully they come back to nests that are still intact and incubating eagles or brooding eaglets, because it's tough, and weather um, has a big factor in what happens. And we there are, the human disturbances and some of the human problems that cause nests to fail, but it's definitely weather. Weather's number one, on the list of what causes nests to not be productive, to be inactive or fail or whatever. So,
We should just
or
add the caveat to that prior to avian flu.
yeah, that's that's hopefully it's not a common occurrence, but
Uh,
we just don't know now
yeah.
what's going to happen with that one.
This year it's not looking good, but hopefully
Yeah.
it isn't
Yeah.
the norm.
We'll probably know, hopefully in the next, I've forecasted, it's usually when it's the migration starts kicking up. So we
Right.
should have a better idea by probably May, early May. It will give us a better idea what's going on. So, but
So,
hopefully it's
oh, go ahead.
hopefully it's not that bad, but we'll have to see.
So, something else that happened recently, Drew, while we have this picture up, is another conversation was about a nest, and I forget which nest it is. But a subadult had landed on the side of the nest, and the female, I don't know if she was incubating or brooding, so she was either on eggs or she had small chicks, but um, a subadult landed on the nest and was like a foot and a half maybe from the female brooding, and she started to mantle and protecting what she was her eggs or her chicks, and the the subadult was taking advantage of the buffet of fish that was on the nest. And what we're seeing here in this photo is there's at least three portions of looks like salmon up there on the nest. And so the parents make sure that there's a lot of food to be fed immediately when the chicks start saying they're hungry. So they have this fish there that they can start picking apart and feeding them, and they want to make sure there's a bounty up there so that the chicks can be fed right away. But then the problem with that is that it attracts um, you know, other eagles that are looking for an easy meal and not having to go fish for it themselves. And
Yeah.
so that was the case of this female who, for 18 minutes, was mantling and trying to protect her nestlings while this other bird ate on the side of the nest. And the mate finally did fly in and did chase it off. But, you're never really quite sure what could happen there, and it certainly could take a chick if it had gotten within reach of one, because again it would be an easy meal to them.
Yeah. And Beth, can you expand mantling? Because
Oh
just
yeah.
if somebody doesn't know the terminology, what exactly is that?
So if you are a sibling and you had other siblings and you just got your birthday dessert or something, you're going to mantle by putting your
Yeah,
hands around your bowl and not letting your siblings get a spoon in there. So mantling for an eagle is sort of the same thing. And what they'll do, they'll put up their wings and they'll block that meal in front of them so that nobody else can get to it. And mantling for the female on this nest wasn't necessarily protecting a food source, in her mind. She's protecting her young, but ultimately she's protecting her young from becoming a food source
yeah,
to another raptor. So it's a really uncomfortable thing to watch. And Drew and
yeah,
I have both seen it happen multiple times, both where the invader is really aggressive, and sometimes where you feel kind of bad for the invader because they didn't know they were invading.
yeah,
But they're during nesting season, eagles are not tolerant of other eagles or any raptor being anywhere near them.
Yeah, that's it's interesting to see it. It's kind of I kind of call it like kind of umbrellaing too. You like
Yeah.
they kind of they have these, you know, enormous wings, and they're protecting their eggs or their young from danger. So it's intriguing, and it's very interesting. We were talking about this before our pod. There was a well, probably one of my favorite nests that I monitor through the years. It was in New York, and this one, um, it seemed like every time I went out there, they were defending their nests. So it was very exciting, but I did feel pretty bad for this pair because they were using a lot of energy to defend their territory. And you know what I concluded was that there was a roosting site. So eagles that aren't associated with a nest will roost together. And it's usually by a good food source. So this was near the Hudson River, so there was ample fishing. And unfortunately for this nest, they were kind of right in the the highway, I guess, of the eagles. So they were constantly defending nests, and you see you know, a subadult or a younger eagle trying to get into the nest to, as you know, as you can see from this picture, there's a lot of just food, and they could try to grab a baby as well, grab an eaglet. That happens periodically too. We've seen that a number of times during the nest watch. And you know, it's those adults have to be really good, and the older ones are very good at their craft of you know, as Beth had mentioned that you know, the male didn't show up for 18 minutes on that case. It's you know, some of the better ones, the more experienced ones, you know, the whoever's incubating or on the nest will call them in, and they'll pretty much immediately come in and defend the nest. That's a sign of a good experienced nest pair that's done this many times and can defend their territory. Because one of the, you know, is weather's probably number one, but I think number two probably is other eagles trying to come in, and that they can wreak havoc on a nest that's not defended very well too. So those are probably the two big ones as far as when stuff goes wrong. It's one of those two instances.
Yeah, we kind of repeated ourselves a little bit from earlier podcast in talking
Yeah,
about this, but you know, because Jackie and Shadow have become this national phenomenon, and think people in other countries are watching them as well. It's really big news, and it's so great to see them successful after years of not being successful. But we just felt like, oh, we couldn't skip over this news topic today
yeah,
because you know, it's just this morning that their one eaglet is now missing and certainly presumed, you know, gone.
yeah,
It's just too young to survive, um, you know, the snow and the cold that's happening out there. So we hope it's minimal to other nests, but it is hard to lay three eggs and raise three chicks without um, a lot of luck on your side,
yeah.
good weather, and a good food opportunities.
Yeah, and you get those like you know, like you're doing. It's not almost spring, but not technically spring. But you get those spring storms, like you know, that just if they come through at the right time, it can be devastating to a lot of nests. And unfortunately, that's the way it is sometimes. It's pure luck in a lot of cases. And you know, we talked about on the last pod about, you know, early nests that are early, and then nests that are kind of their timing, they start real early. I would consider these guys on the earlier side because they probably, what, Beth, probably started incubating in maybe late January,
Yep,
early
they have to be
February. Yeah,
January. Yeah.
which is pretty early. Um, and then they had an early hatch. So it's kind of the luck of the draw. If this is a normal, I guess more normal timing, they probably would have been on eggs through this big storm. So in some cases that benefits a pair and sometimes it doesn't. It kind of all depends on what happens. So, it is a lot of luck and timing, just because the season is so long for the Eagles, as we mentioned before.
No, I did watch them feeding the eaglets, and because we watch from the ground, Wisconsin doesn't have many, if any, nest cams. There's just a couple that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
And so we don't get to see this view. So this is really great for Drew and I and for
yeah.
all of our nest watchers to be watching it. How many nest watchers are we up to?
We are over 500 now.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah,
So there are a lot of people in Wisconsin looking at eagle nests,
yeah,
which just a shout out to all of them.
yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
because we
guys.
can't
Yeah,
do it without you. But these nest cams provide a different viewpoint of some of the things that are happening in the nest. And I just got to say, I am so impressed with these big birds with these huge beaks and these 2 ounce little hatchlings that come
yeah,
out. The tenderness in which they will pick apart food to feed to the eaglets is just
yeah,
a really a thing of beauty to watch. I
yeah. It
mean,
is.
we're kind of talking about a downer today again, but the reality is just these big birds, and look at those talons on this bird, that it's going to put those talons on either side of that group of three chicks and then start rocking back and forth doing the squishy thing
Yeah,
to get their brood patch back in touch with those three little bobbleheads in order to keep them warm and safe. The fact that there aren't more incidents of accidental death that way is,
yeah.
pretty impressive.
Yeah, and then they'll, I think it's more usually when they're walking around the nest or with the eggs, she'll in this case they'll tuck those talons in to protect, because those are killers right there. That's their weapons. So they don't want those anywhere near their eggs or their eaglets because they can create a lot of they've created a lot of destruction, and a lot of animals have been at the end of those talons. That's the last thing they saw were those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
A lot of people are afraid of the beak and think the beak is
yeah,
the thing to fear. And as a raptor handler, I have learned the difference between my parrot upstairs, which is
yeah,
definitely I fear her beak.
yeah,
Not really, but I do, yeah. Her beak is her weapon.
yeah,
Whereas in the raptor world, it is not the beak, it is the feet. So
yeah,
those talons are not to be messed with. They're incredibly sharp, and when you have them standing on, your arm, I've never had the uh, pleasure of having an eagle on a glove, but a red-tailed hawk and barred owl. But it's impressive, and
yeah.
you want to have a lot of respect for those because their ability to uh, crush down on you is pretty significant. They have a greater tensile strength than we do. So again, those little eaglets in the nest and
Yeah.
being around those those daggers, it's again, it's good parenting that keeps them all healthy and um, growing.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before. I don't, I know I've mentioned it to you, Beth, but I think I've mentioned it on the pod too as well. Is like one of my favorite things about nesting bald eagles is you think of them as they are this apex predator that's just lethal, and to just see them in a different light when they are nesting where they're very tender and they're just so protective of their little guys, of their little eaglets. It's amazing to see that, I guess, contrast in their personality, where you think of them as this big um you know dangerous killer basically, and to see them bringing in new life and really helping them throughout, it's a great experience to watch. And I'm glad people are, volunteering with us and some of the other nest watches that we have across the country, as well as watching the nest cams, because the nest cams are, if you're unable to participate in nest watches, it's also a great tool and a fun
Great
entertainment to
learning
do.
experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So
it does involve death, because there
yeah,
is just no way death isn't happening every day at these nests.
yeah,
Not to the eaglets necessarily, to themselves, but to some other animal, to a fish, um to something that's going to feed these young birds, and raise them up into being full size adult size within 3 months. And the fact that they go from this to that in such a quick
yeah.
period of time is pretty mind-blowing. Can you imagine if your children grew that fast, Drew?
Yeah, yeah, that would that'd be crazy. And I think we'll just finish up. I just wanted to update our again our bald eagle nest watch. We actually had our first um group wide, just to let us, I think I know I've mentioned this before, but we're in a large portion of Wisconsin. Beth is the southeastern lead, I'm the southern lead. So we're doing mostly southern Wisconsin, but we go up into central and the Fox Valley and different areas throughout the state, and we're just growing and growing and growing. Our last update, and this is probably changed and
Right.
out of date by now, but it's also, very
But it
gratifying
was
to
this
see this.
week.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully it doesn't change too much with this storm. Fingers crossed. You guys don't get it turns out to be a dud, but we'll just have to wait and see. But we have 290 nests that are being observed. Latest count, we had 178 nests with either eggs or eaglets in the nest. And we have at least 8 nests with eaglets currently, so that's really exciting. And we've only had, to be honest, not too many inactives. There's probably about a half dozen right now that we've, called that are just there's no activity at the nest. So we're off to a really good start. And again, wanted to thank all our, if you're listening to this and you're one of our volunteers, thank you, thank you. You guys are amazing and doing amazing work with monitoring your nest. So throughout the state. So it's been amazing experience just seeing this group just grow and grow. And as I mentioned, there's over 500 volunteers, which is crazy. It's crazy. We were at 40, I think it was 45 our first year. So we've just,
Well, there were just 6 of us in the
yeah,
Southeast section
yeah,
when we started out.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny how um m- how very dedicated our watchers are in
yeah,
going out in inclement weather, and checking on the nests, because they become a bit of part of your family as well. And it's something that connects you to other people, love of raptors, and going through this process and learning more about them as you watch them. And you think, well, what can I really learn as I sit there and I watch a nest? And the thing that I always say is, you will get to know those bald eagles and their preferences for where they like to sit and roost at night, for how they like to get on and off the nest, for where their favorite hunting spots are. And then, as you watch them over the years, sometimes you notice a change where, well, the male is no longer roosting in that tree that he loved. And, you eventually come to see, oh, yeah, we've had a change at the nest.
yeah,
And because they're creatures of habit like we are, we get to know them really well. They don't might not really care for the fact that we get to know them this well, or that we're watching them, but we do manage to learn an awful lot about them through these observations that we do and the
yeah.
reports that we do weekly, on what we see happening at our nests.
Yeah, and I think our perspective with the Nest Watch, with people that monitor the Nest versus the Nest cams, I think is a different perspective. But highly rewarding as well because viewing it from a distance and viewing it through scopes and cameras or binoculars, you're getting more of a wide range of the territory. And something that I've seen as with these nest cams is you see these events, and when you're out at a nest and you see something like how we mentioned that there was a intruder coming into the nest, you can see that from a long ways out. Okay, here's a subadult, you know, starting to head towards the nest. I wonder what's going to happen. Where at a nest cam, it's so tight, the camera is so tight, you get that very tail end of what happened, but you might not get the whole picture. So they're both valuable, but what we're doing out in the field is you get that more rounded experience where you're not seeing how many eggs are in the nest and stuff like that, but you're also seeing the territory as a whole of what's going on. So it is interesting. I think both are beneficial to really learning about eagles. I use a lot of resources with the nest cams about finding out stuff.
Yeah.
Because they have that tight view and they can see more precisely what's going on, where we might not have that type of detail to understand what's actually going on in the nests. We have to, a lot of times we're using the behavior of the adults mostly to tell the story for us, where in the actual nest cams, because it has a view, you can actually see what the eaglets are doing and all that stuff, which is very interesting as well.
Yeah, and to those people who are, disheartened and, um, feeling depressed or saddened about what has happened with Jackie and Shadow, I know we sound sort of like we're, I don't know, callous, and that we'd say that's just life in a bald eagle nest. But there is truth to that, and in it, even though it's sad, it's still it's I think still admirable to watch how these parents are so resilient that they aren't skipping a beat. They have two eaglets they have to raise, and
Yeah.
so they are um that's what their instincts, have told them to do. That's their job. And it's unfortunate that they lost an eaglet, but they're going to keep doing their job as best they can to fledge those eaglets from the nest, to see them take their first flight and then teach them some great hunting skills.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten that question quite a bit throughout the year. Like when I hear back from a volunteer that had triplets, had three, and then they're like, Drew, something happened to them. They only have two, and they're saddened by that. And I try to point out like an average nest is that they're going to fledge is about 1.5 eaglets. So if they're fledging two eaglets, that's a huge success. That's actually above average. So it's if those two eaglets fledge, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. That's above average what a normal nest does. It's one to
Yeah.
two eaglets. So
I,
it's
I remember
unfortunate.
talking to you early on and saying,
Yeah.
in our area we kept getting three eaglets, three eaglets, three,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I thought three eaglets was rare. And
Yeah.
as you pointed out, the abundance of food is a good thing, but now that is tampered down a little bit. We aren't getting as many three eaglet
Yeah.
nests as we used to.
Yeah, so it's triplets are fun, and there's a lot going on, but they're again they're not the commonplace. So if we if they can get two eaglets to fledge, that's a win, and that's a success. And I think if we look at it at a positive dimension, if the eaglets fledge, that's a great thing for this pair, and to have success too with their unfortunate history. A lot of it comes down to luck. Beth and I, we've talked about this many times. There just seems to be some nests that are just snake bitten. They just have horrible luck, and there's others that just it seems like whatever goes wrong will go wrong, and then there's others nests that are like a tree will fall down, but it'll completely miss the nest. And then there's other ones
Yeah,
where the tree always falls into the nest. So
yeah.
it's a lot of it's, part of its luck. So it's unfortunate, but the thing about eagles is they'll keep going, they'll move on quickly, and they're laser focused on raising those two that are still surviving, and getting them out in the world, and getting them fledged and producing. So
That is
that's
an excellent way of saying it, Drew.
yeah,
I think laser focused, they're laser focused on feeding those little upturned beaks in
yeah,
their nest, and that's what they go on.
yeah, yeah. And I try to take that. That's one of the things I've taken from watching eagles is, as a human being, you get very emotional about stuff in your life. And I've tried to take it a little bit of eagle in me and be like, just focus on the next day or whatever. And don't get hung up on a lot of that stuff that a lot of ways you can't control. So I think they do that extremely well as far as,
Yeah.
um, you know, saying, okay, move on, and, get the job done, and raise your eaglets, but and don't worry about what happened to the other one, because it's in
It's
the
gone.
past, I guess. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard as us for humans, but it's very easy for eagles to do that. So
That just keep moving.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The
Just keep
dory
moving.
dory way.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, very nice. I guess we'll end. I didn't run this by Beth, but I'll hopefully she can shoot from the hip. I was just gonna,
Uh-oh.
we're kind of getting into um, eagles hatching. So, this is one of my favorite times of year when you get to the nest, and, they've been, you know, um, incubating the eggs for 30 plus days. And you're like, oh, maybe this is the week that we see hatchling, and you see that eagle sitting up a little higher, staring into that nest, and then you might see that them tearing off pieces and feeding. And you might see a little head pop up here or there. The little, we call them like rag dolls, because at first their head strength isn't that great. That's just,
Bobbleheads.
yeah, it's fun. So like that is one of the most gratifying experiences, watching the nest, is seeing that hatch, knowing it hatched, and seeing those little babies flop around. So it's starting to get into that time. It's a little bit on the early side for most of the nests, but we are seeing, probably eight plus nests that already have babies in the nest. So that's always fun.
It is very exciting.
Yeah,
I love that time of year.
yeah,
And the hard part is if you photograph it or you try to see it, sometimes you can't really tell what's going on in the nest. But I remember I took pictures of this shadow that I saw in the nest, and it's like thinking it was a chick, and I was um, seeing it, and it was the shadow, and so my pictures were all focused on the shadow
yeah,
instead of the gray thing in front of it because it was
yeah,
blending in with the
yeah,
background. So all I could pick out was a shadow. So we are from such a long ways away, but
yeah,
fortunately it gave me some pictures of the chick wandering around the nest. And then that's when we all get really paranoid with, oh, don't bobble your way out of the
yeah.
nest bowl and out of the nest, because that is of course not a good thing to happen, and I've never seen that happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I haven't either.
just a
So yeah,
fear.
yeah, yeah. But it's always fun, and it's kind of starts that process, and it gets, as I mentioned in pretty much every training I've done, which I've done many, is once they have the eaglets in the nest, then it starts to get fun, and
Yeah.
you see a lot of activity, and it's a lot of fun.
Well,
So
I do kind of refer to this portion of it as watching paint dry.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So,
yeah,
but yeah, the hatching, yeah, different
yeah,
story. Nest becomes very active with adults flying in and out, going to hunt and bring food back to feed the kids, and then brood, keep them warm on the cold days, and then as they start growing up and you see more and more of them exposed in the nest, it's just a thrill.
yeah. And we'll wrap it up now, but as as I've mentioned in the past, if you have any questions or have any cool photography, send it along to us. We're on Facebook at Nesting Eagles Podcast, and also on email at Nesting Eagles Podcast at gmail.com. So send us your pictures. We'd love to highlight some of our listeners in future videos and your photography. So, we'd love to show it off. And as always, if you like what you see, tell a friend, like our videos, and please subscribe. And with that done, I think we'll wrap it up. Anything else, Beth?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
Survive the weather, everyone.
Yeah, yeah, good luck to everybody that's being affected by the storm in the Midwest now. So, probably hit into the East, I imagine too. So, we're thinking of you guys, and thinking of you, Beth.
Yeah.
We had like a little weird squall here yesterday, but that was the extent of it, I think, for us. So, but yeah, definitely thinking of Wisconsin. Hopefully everything gets through, and all the nests
Yeah.
and all the people are fine, and nothing major happens. But we'll have to see.
Yep.
All right.
Fingers crossed.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.